Hello everyone, welcome to Shak Horror Stories. Before we dive into the tales of terror, please take a moment to subscribe to my channel and hit that like button. Also, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Your comments will significantly help my channel's growth, and I appreciate your support more than you know. Alright, let's dive into the stories. I was born and raised in Alabama, specifically in a small town nestled in the Appalachian Mountains. I always loved living there. The atmosphere was peaceful, the neighbors were friendly, and although strange things happened from time to time, it was never anything serious enough to make me truly dislike this part of the country. To me, it still remains one of the most genuine and unforgettable places a person can grow up. The story I'm about to tell you happened exactly 2 weeks after we moved into a new house during a time when I was completely alone. For everything to make sense, I need to start from the beginning. My grandparents passed away when I was just 13 years old. I remember the day perfectly. My grandmother went out for a walk in the woods, something she did often, and ended up having a heart attack. My grandfather, maybe from grief or for some other reason we never fully understood, died a few months later in exactly the same way. A heart attack in the exact same spot during one of his solitary walks back. Then no one really looked for deeper explanations or connections between the two deaths. First, because we were all still grieving and trying to come to terms with the loss. And second, because they were both over 85 years old, which made it easier to accept as coincidence. After all, at that age anything can happen at any time. And in the woods, all it takes is a little scare or a bit of exertion to be fatal. The truth is, aside from my older brother who never quite accepted the official version, no one really bothered to find a more logical or concrete explanation for what happened. At the time, we were living in a pretty old house, and that's why we decided to move into my grandparents' place. Me, my mom, and my brother, who was 4 years older than me. My grandparents' house, though pretty secluded, was more spacious and relatively more modern, at least compared to our old place. My mom, who'd been a single parent ever since my dad died when I was still a baby, always had to work hard to support us. Sometimes she held down 2, even 3 jobs at once, which meant she was out of the house most of the time. My brother, being older and already having his own group of friends, was also out a lot, especially at night. That left me just 13 home alone pretty often. Something that no matter how hard I tried to act grown up and independent, always made me feel a little uneasy. The truth is, I liked our old house better. It was closer to town and we had neighbors nearby. At my grandparents' house, the backyard backed straight up to the woods, and that always gave me a weird feeling, like something unseen was watching from the trees. Clearly remember a story from my childhood when my brother had to see the school psychologist because for weeks he kept insisting there were creatures living in the forest. They said he had some kind of anxiety disorder, and eventually he stopped talking about it. Maybe because someone taught him to shut up, or maybe because he realized nobody believed him. But that story never left my mind, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, it was always there, like a shadow in my memory, quietly feeding my anxiety. Back to the night when it all happened. It had been a few weeks since our grandfather had passed, and only 2 weeks since we moved in. I was completely alone. My mom was working a night shift at a bar, and my brother had gone out to a party with some friends. Just so you can picture the house, it has 3 floors, and it's built on a small hill. That means the basement is level with the ground. At the back of the house, but buried into the hill at the front. If you come in from the backyard through the woods, you enter directly into the basement and have to go up 2 floors to reach my bedroom. If you come in from the front, you enter straight into the living room and kitchen, and then only have to go up 1 flight of stairs to get to the 2nd floor where I slept. I was lying in bed reading. It was past 11 at night when I clearly heard the sound of a window opening. I froze instantly. I knew that house well, and I was absolutely certain that if it was a window, it could only be the one in the basement. It was the only sliding window in the house. All the others were old-fashioned ones that opened inward. The basement window had been replaced recently and was different, and I knew for a fact I had locked it. It couldn't be opened from the outside. If it were my mom or my brother, they'd have to come through the door, not the window. I stayed completely still in bed, straining to hear anything else. The silence was total, but my heartbeat was so loud it felt like it was echoing through the entire room. I was just 13, and even though I wanted to be brave, I was alone in a house that still didn't feel like mine, in the middle of a dense, dark forest. I was scared, really scared. Minutes passed. I don't know how many, and the silence remained. No sounds. I started convincing myself I had imagined it all. I went back to my book, or at least I tried, but I couldn't focus. No matter how many times I read and reread the same page, nothing was sticking. I didn't have a TV or computer in my room at the time, so I just lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to fall asleep. That's when I heard my brother's voice calling me. I jumped, but at the same time I felt a wave of relief. Maybe it had been him who made the window noise, and I just hadn't heard the door open. I answered him but got no reply. I called again. Still nothing. I got out of bed and walked to the door. I heard my brother's voice again calling me, and so I started going down the stairs, following that familiar sound. Halfway down to the basement, I saw the sliding window wide open, and in that instant I knew for sure something was wrong. At that exact moment, I felt something move behind me. I turned around, and up on the top floor I saw a shadow pass by. I didn't think twice. I bolted through the basement, out the open window, and sprinted across the backyard in a panicked, irrational run until I crashed into my brother and two of his friends, who were just coming in from the woods. He was shocked to see me like that and immediately asked what was wrong. I was gasping for air, trying to explain, but the words weren't coming out right. I kept pointing back at the house, trying to tell him someone was inside. Someone had been calling his name. Someone had opened the basement window. My brother looked at his friends and then back at me. He could see I wasn't messing around. He could see the genuine terror on my face. One of his friends pulled out his phone and called the police, while my brother grabbed a flashlight from his car and started walking toward the house. I begged him not to go inside, but he told me to stay with his friends and wait. He went in through the basement window, the same one I'd just escaped from. I stood there in the cold night air, shaking, watching the beam of his flashlight move through the rooms. It felt like forever, but it was probably only 5 minutes before he came back out. He said the house was empty. No one was there. But then he told me something that made my blood run cold. The front door was unlocked. Wide open, actually. And he knew for certain he'd locked it before leaving. The police arrived shortly after. They searched the entire house, top to bottom. They found the basement window open, just like I'd said. They found the front door unlocked, but they didn't find anyone inside. No signs of forced entry, except for the window which, according to them, could have been opened from the inside if someone knew how to manipulate the lock. They asked me questions. What did the voice sound like? Was I sure it was my brother's voice? Did I see anyone? Did I hear footsteps? I answered as best I could, but honestly, I was still in shock. The voice had sounded exactly like my brother. That's why I'd followed it. That's why I'd gone downstairs in the first place. One of the officers, an older man with kind eyes, sat down with me on the porch and told me something I'll never forget. He said that in these mountains, especially in the old forests around here, there are things that have learned to mimic human voices. He said it in a way that made it clear he wasn't joking. He wasn't trying to scare me. He was trying to warn me. He told me that over the years there had been reports from people living near the woods. People who heard family members calling them from the trees. People who followed those voices and got lost. Some of them were never found. Others came back different, unable to explain what happened or where they'd been. He said the old-timers in the area have a rule. If you hear someone calling you from the woods, especially at night, you don't answer. You don't follow. You stay inside and you lock your doors. Because whatever is calling you, it's not who you think it is. My brother didn't believe any of it. He thought the officer was just trying to explain away what was probably just some drifter or a burglar who'd gotten spooked and run off. But I believed it, because I know what I heard, and I know that voice led me down those stairs, toward that open window, toward the woods. If my brother hadn't come home exactly when he did, if I hadn't turned around and seen that shadow on the top floor, I would have kept following that voice. I would have gone out that window, and I don't think I would have come back. After that night, my mom made sure someone was always home with me. My brother started taking his responsibilities more seriously. And we never talked about what the officer said, but I know it stayed with both of them just like it stayed with me. A few months later, we moved again. My mom said the house was too big, too expensive to maintain, but I think the real reason was that none of us felt safe there anymore. Not after that night. I'm older now, living on my own, far from those mountains. But every now and then, usually late at night when I'm alone, I think about that voice. I think about how perfectly it mimicked my brother, how it knew exactly what to say to get me to follow. And I think about my grandparents, both of them dying in the same spot in those woods, both of them going out for walks alone, both of them having heart attacks with no witnesses, no explanations. I wonder if they heard voices too. I wonder if something called to them, using a voice they trusted, and led them deep into the forest. Deep enough that by the time they realized something was wrong, it was too late to turn back. My brother still doesn't talk about it, but a few years ago during a family dinner, he mentioned something in passing that made me look up from my plate. He said he'd been reading about the Appalachian Mountains, about the old legends and folklore. He said there were stories going back, hundreds of years, about things in the woods that hunt by mimicking voices. He didn't look at me when he said it, but I knew he was thinking about that night. The night I almost followed a voice that wasn't his. The night something tried to lure me into the forest. The Appalachian Mountains are beautiful. They're full of life and history and mystery, but they're also full of things we don't understand. Things that have been there long before. We arrived and will be there long after we're gone. And some of those things have learned that the easiest way to catch a human is to sound like someone they love, someone they trust, someone they would follow anywhere, even into the dark woods where no one can hear you scream. I still go back to Alabama sometimes to visit family, but I never go near those woods. And if I ever hear someone calling my name from the trees, I won't answer. I won't even look, because I know now that some voices should never be followed, and some invitations should never be accepted. The mountains remember everything, and they're always listening. This happened 15 years ago when I was still living with my parents and siblings in the Appalachian Mountains of Georgia. No matter how much time passes, that night remains burned into my memory in a way that still affects me to this day, especially when I'm home alone at night. I was born and raised in a remote area of those mountains. To be completely honest, I never really liked living there. Maybe it was the constant weirdness in the air, whether it was strange sounds coming from the woods, or people who sometimes just seemed completely out of their minds. And anyone who lives or has ever lived in that region knows some days feel like a full-blown circus act. My sister was a true dance prodigy, and from a very young age, schools had already started expressing interest in having her join their programs. That particular weekend, my parents had planned a short trip to visit one of those schools. They left right after lunch on Friday, and planned to be back on Sunday as soon as they could. My younger brother, who was only 8 at the time, naturally went with them. I didn't go, not because I couldn't, but because honestly, the idea of staying home alone was way too tempting. To give you an idea of where we lived, it was an area where homes were more like actual farms. Huge properties with land that stretched out for kilometers into the forest. That meant we lived in almost complete isolation. On my mother's side especially, our family had a long and deeply rooted relationship with guns. So from a young age, I was used to seeing them around the house. And more importantly, I knew exactly how to use them. Before leaving, my dad repeated, probably for the 100th time, the 3 golden rules he lived by. Don't react to noises coming from the forest. Don't open the door to anyone. And never under any circumstances go outside after dark. Simple rules, but taken very seriously by people who live out there. I told him I was just going to spend the night, quietly playing video games, and would go to bed early, which to be fair was my plan. As soon as they left, I followed everything my dad had ever taught me to the letter. I locked all the windows, doors, and any other potential entry points into the house. I saved the living room window for last, a massive window that took up almost an entire wall and was a centerpiece of our home. During the day, it filled the living room with sunlight. At night, we usually closed it except on full moon nights, when we left the blinds open until the last person went to bed just to enjoy the view. That night was a new moon, and even though it was dark, there was this strange sort of glow outside that made the forest in the distance look both fascinating and terrifying at the same time. It was a beautiful kind of fear, if that makes any sense, like a controlled kind of dread that I'll admit I sort of enjoyed. I locked all the windows, but since I was planning to hang out in the living room playing games, I left that big one open. I heated up the pizza that my parents had left me, plopped down on the couch and played for hours. Eventually, exhausted and half asleep, I turned off the PlayStation, stayed there on the couch for a few seconds, and of course I ended up dozing off. I woke up around 4 in the morning with that unbearable feeling that someone was watching me. That's when I realized I'd forgotten to close the blinds. Still groggy, I got up to close them and saw something that froze me to the core. A handprint on the glass. It looked like someone had pressed their hand against it to peek inside. The moonlight was just enough for me to clearly see the shape of the palm and fingers. I stood there paralyzed for a few seconds and then tried to convince myself it could have been a print left by one of my parents from a few days earlier. I closed the blinds, went to my room, and more out of instinct than actual belief, locked the door behind me. Saturday started off completely normal with nothing out of the ordinary. I didn't have any real plans, so I invited a friend from school over to hang out for the afternoon. He showed up around 2 and stayed playing games with me well past dinner. When I walked him to the door, I noticed something that made me stop for a second. A pair of footprints in the damp ground outside. It hadn't rained in the morning, but around 4 in the afternoon there had been a light drizzle, which meant those prints had to have been made after he arrived. And neither of us had stepped outside that whole time. That handprint on the glass came rushing back into my mind. Had someone been creeping around the house, I didn't want to show any sign of fear in front of my friend, so I didn't say a word. But the moment he left, I checked and double-checked every door and window, then grabbed one of the guns we kept in the house. Because no matter how much I tried to convince myself otherwise, it no longer felt like a coincidence. Someone had been out there the night before, watching me while I slept on the couch. I thought about calling my parents, but I didn't want to seem like I couldn't handle it, or worse, give them a reason to never let me stay home alone again. So I didn't. I tried calming myself with the thought that even if someone had been out there, they were still outside, and that idea gave me a few minutes of comfort. That is, until I started heading up the stairs to my room and noticed a motionless shadow at the top, right in the corner where I used to hide to jump scare my siblings. That's when I knew without a shred of doubt. I wasn't alone in the house. I gripped the gun tightly, instantly feeling the real weight of what it would mean to pull the trigger on another human being. Without thinking twice, I bolted for the kitchen door that led to the garage, slammed it shut behind me, and bought myself a few precious seconds. I managed to unlock the garage door, jump into my dad's old car, the one he sometimes let me drive, and just as I jammed the key into the ignition, I heard frantic footsteps coming down the stairs, followed by violent bangs on the door. Someone was trying to break it down. I floored it, and in the rearview mirror I saw him clear as day, a man dressed all in black stepping through the now broken door. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest, and it's honestly a miracle I didn't cause two separate accidents that night from how badly my hands were shaking. I drove straight to my friend's house because I had no idea where else to go, and only when I got there did I finally feel like I could breathe again. His dad called the cops and then got in touch with my parents. The police came, looked everything over, but aside from the kitchen door that had been busted open, nothing was broken or out of place. The only thing that confirmed someone had actually been inside was the piece of paper left on my bed. Handwritten on it were the words, "Next time you won't be so lucky." I ended up living in that house for another 6 years, but I never spent another night there alone. Not me, not anyone. My parents upgraded all the security, and we never had another incident after that. Still, all these years later, thousands of miles away, I get chills every time shadows stretch across the walls of my house. Like for just a moment, I'm 16 again, staring up at the top of the stairs, frozen in place, absolutely sure someone was watching me from the dark. The Appalachian Mountains hold more than just natural beauty. They hold people who know how to stay hidden, who know how to wait, and who understand that isolation is their greatest weapon. I live in New York City now, but I grew up and spent my entire childhood in West Virginia. Up until the night this story takes place, I loved living there. But after what happened, I could never think of that place as home again. It's been 23 years now, and I can finally look back on that night with a bit of emotional distance. The hardest moments are when I go visit my parents and step back into that house, that room, and relive that night all over again. I had just turned 13 the week before, and in all my preteen arrogance, I was starting to act out a little, fully convinced I was already old enough to make my own decisions. Our house was in a neighborhood with a few other houses nearby, but right in our backyard was the edge of one of the largest forests in the region. My parents were always really strict about never leaving me home alone. We lived in a place that was relatively quiet, sure, but it wasn't unusual to hear about small break-ins now and then. And the year before in the neighboring town, a kid had completely vanished. He was only 7, taken from inside his own home while his parents and grandparents were there. It had been a huge scandal around here, and it only made my parents, and honestly most of the parents in the area, even more cautious. That particular night we'd had a fight in the afternoon. I can't even remember what started it, but I remember exactly how it ended. Shouting and my firm decision that I was not going to my mom's work party. I was dead set on it. I remember yelling to the point where my mom, who rarely lost her temper, got really mad. It might have been one of the worst arguments we ever had. They were genuinely hurt, and I remember them walking out and slamming the door behind them without saying a word. They'd planned to be back right after dinner. I, on the other hand, was proud of myself. I finally had the whole house to myself and could do whatever I wanted, at least until they got back. I know I was being totally stubborn, one of those arrogant kids who thinks they know everything. But to be fair, that phase came and went pretty quickly. I mean, most of us go through it at some point, some more than others, but it's pretty much a universal experience. Since I didn't have a TV in my room, I stayed in the living room. It must have been around 8:30 when the storm started. Heavy rain, pounding wind. I could hear the trees whipping around out back, and I had to turn the TV up just to hear anything. At about 9:10, the landline rang. It was my parents calling to say there had been a landslide on the main road into town, and traffic was completely blocked. That's when I realized how serious the storm actually was. My mom was speaking louder than usual, maybe because of the rain hammering down on the car. I told them not to worry, that everything was fine. I was still trying to play the part of the angry kid, but my mom's voice, sad and anxious, just erased any leftover anger I had. So I told her I was okay and asked her not to worry. She gave me a list of things to do. Double-check that all the windows and doors were shut tight. Unplug a few appliances just in case the storm caused a power surge. Supposedly my dad had already locked everything before they left, but they wanted me to check anyway. You could hear the storm from downstairs. But once I started going up the stairs, I realized the second floor was way colder and the sound of the rain and wind was way louder. At first, I thought it was just the master bedroom, which faced the woods and always sounded louder when it rained. But when I got to the top of the stairs, I noticed the bathroom window was wide open. I didn't think much of it. Assumed the wind had blown it open. I went over, shut it, and headed back downstairs to wait for my parents. But time kept passing and nothing happened. Then around 9:45, the phone rang again. My parents wanted to check in, said the police were trying to clear the road, and with a little luck they'd be home in an hour. I was about to hang up when I heard the upstairs floor creak. The house wasn't new, and we'd had moisture issues for a while, so certain spots, especially near my room, always creaked when someone stepped on them. I hung up and froze, trying to figure out if I'd imagined it. It was a faint sound, barely noticeable, but it was there. The floor was creaking. And then as suddenly as it started, the sound stopped. I told myself it was probably just the wind or a pressure shift or something. There couldn't be anyone inside. If there were, I'd be hearing more than just faint creaks. I sat back down in the living room, but I was getting more and more anxious. All I wanted was for my parents to get home. There's something I haven't mentioned. I'm diabetic, and I have to check my blood sugar regularly. I've known how to recognize the warning signs since I was a kid. If my levels get too high, I need insulin right away, or I could go into shock. All my medical supplies were on my nightstand, and even though it was the last thing I felt like doing, I knew I had to go upstairs. I started climbing the stairs, and as I got near the top, my whole body tensed up. Parts of the hallway floor were wet, like someone had come inside with soaked shoes and left a trail. That's when it all clicked. The open window, the noises upstairs, and now this. But when I first came up to close the window, there hadn't been any water on the floor, which meant that if someone had come in through there, they were already inside the bathroom at the same time I was, probably hiding in the bathtub while I was standing just a few feet away closing the damn window. That realization terrified me in a way I still can't fully explain. It felt like I almost had a heart attack right there. My room was the first door in the hallway. Then at the far end was the bathroom, and next to it my parents' room, right where the floor was wet. Very slowly I stepped into my room and closed the door behind me. My parents had a strict rule, no locking bedroom doors, so they'd taken the key out. In that moment, I would have given anything to know where they kept it. I ran to my nightstand, grabbed my glucose meter, and checked how much insulin I needed. That's when I heard the floor creak again. I grabbed everything and hid inside my closet. Now here's the thing about that closet. When my parents bought the house, my room was originally 2 separate rooms. They turned them into 1. But there was a part of the wall they couldn't completely remove, so they built a closet around it. To make the most of the space, they added a hidden crawl space in the back that no one knew about. It was my favorite hiding spot when I played with my cousins. I kept hearing the creaking, clearer now, like the footsteps were coming from my mom's office in the next room. It gave me just enough time to inject the insulin. Then I heard my bedroom door open. Someone had actually come in. By that point, I was already inside the crawl space, and the door was shut behind me. I don't think I've ever been so scared in my life. They walked through the room, circled the bed, peeked behind the curtains. They were definitely looking for me. Then I heard footsteps coming toward the closet. I heard the door open, felt the clothes being pushed to one side. I was sure they'd find me, but after a long silence, the footsteps moved away and I heard them sit down on my bed. I had both hands over my mouth, trying not to make a single sound. And then over the sound of the rain, I heard my parents' car pull into the driveway. The person got up, walked to the window, opened it. A few seconds later, I heard the front door open. My mom started calling my name. That's when I lost it. I broke down completely, crying like I'd never cried before. Like all the fear I'd bottled up suddenly tore its way out. I heard my parents calling louder, maybe already sensing something was wrong. But I couldn't answer, let alone move. I had no idea if that person was still in the house. What I remember after that comes in flashes. I remember my parents carrying me out of that crawl space, almost dragging me out. I remember trying to explain through pure panic what had happened. The police arriving. A really kind woman asking me questions I couldn't answer. I never saw the person's face. I didn't even know if it was a man or a woman. After everything that happened, I was never left alone again. The following week, my parents installed an alarm system. Later, we were told that a man had been arrested for breaking into another house and stealing valuables. They said it was probably him, but I knew it wasn't. The person who came into our house had the chance to steal something and didn't take anything. Nothing ever happened again, and over time I calmed down. But that night shattered my sense of safety in that house. I moved on and I rarely think about it except on the nights. I go back to sleep in that room and become that terrified 13-year-old kid all over again. Living in the Appalachian Mountains means accepting that you're never truly alone. The woods are always watching, and sometimes what comes out of them doesn't want your belongings. It wants something far more sinister. My name is Liam, and 5 years ago I retired. I was a park ranger my entire life. And as you can imagine, I have enough material to write several books about everything I've seen and experienced in our national parks. As you might expect, there's a lot I'm not at liberty to say openly. But over the years I've shared a few stories, some quirky with happy endings, others deeply disturbing with the worst outcomes imaginable. And then there are the ones I consider the worst of all, the ones that remain unexplained, the ones that leave us with only one certainty: that something truly terrible happened, even if we don't know exactly what. Those are in fact the hardest to bear because they're the ones that haunt us, that stay with us over the years and keep us up at night. This particular story I'm about to tell you is one that's been keeping me up for years. And what eats away at me the most isn't even the violence of what I witnessed, but the lack of answers, the absolute silence from the proper authorities. What upsets me the most is feeling like maybe I never got any explanation, not because there wasn't one, but because they simply didn't want to give it to me. Because, and I am sure of this, something confidential is going on in those mountains. Like I said, this all happened quite a few years ago. And at the time, the search and rescue tools and protocols were very different from what we have now. Far less developed and a lot more limited. Starting from the beginning, that night I was on patrol in a section of the Appalachian Trail. Forgive me for not being more specific, but I've gotten into trouble before for trying to bring this story to light. So this time I'm playing it safe. What I can tell you is that it happened in an area long considered problematic, where disappearances occur way more often than in other forests, and where crimes, when they do happen, tend to be especially brutal and violent. Working that area always had a strange duality to it. On one hand, it's breathtakingly beautiful, but on the other, it forces you to stay constantly alert, always paying attention to your surroundings. Because at any given moment, some unhinged person could show up ready to cause trouble. Night had just fallen when I got an order to investigate a campsite that, according to reports, had been abandoned. The family of a couple had raised the alarm after losing contact with them, and the woman was found in a chaotic state. Up to that point, only the woman had been found wandering, alone down a road in a state of deep shock, with her clothes torn and unable to form coherent sentences. She'd been taken to the hospital the day before, but the truth was very little was known. My mission was to locate where they had camped, and if I could confirm the spot, call for backup. The man, as of then, was still missing. No one knew where he was, and according to the woman herself, she didn't even seem to remember having a husband. That's how confused and mentally scattered she was. Finding the campsite wasn't hard since the family had a pretty good idea of where they wanted to camp and even had some rough coordinates. The hardest part was actually dealing with what I found there and trying to make any logical sense of what might have happened. I'd been hiking for around 45 minutes when I started hearing sounds in the distance. At first I assumed it was an animal, something totally normal and honestly not something that worried me in the slightest. But as I got closer, I started to realize there was something oddly human about those sounds. When I finally reached the clearing, I was met with a scene of total destruction. The campsite was completely trashed, and in the middle of the chaos was a man in rags digging a massive hole with his bare hands. He was doing it compulsively, frenetically, almost like an animal, with his fingertips bloody and caked with dirt, in such a disturbing state that I froze for a few seconds. I should have called for backup immediately. But the truth is, I was so shocked by the image in front of me that I chose instead to approach slowly, trying to understand what was going on. Not for a second did I think he could be dangerous until he punched me square in the face, knocking me backward. My head hit a rock and I blacked out instantly. When I woke up, it was pitch dark. The pain at the back of my head was unbearable, and there was no sign of the man anywhere. My radio was still on, and luckily when they lost my signal, they sent in an emergency team. I got up with difficulty, still staggering, and tried to figure out what was going on around me. Even though the campsite looked like it had been attacked by wild animals, everything turned upside down. Food scattered, tent half collapsed. What really unsettled me was the complete silence. Not a sound. just total silent chaos. I searched the tent, which was empty, and started walking around. There were signs of rotting food, dirty clothes, several barefoot footprints that seemed to belong to different people. And that's when I heard something. Faint breathing, almost imperceptible. That made me realize I wasn't alone. I looked around instinctively but saw no one. My eyes fixed on the edge of the clearing, the dense, dark trees. And that's when I remembered the hole the man had been digging. I headed over, and when I peeked inside, I felt a deep chill. The man was lying at the bottom of the hole, motionless, curled up almost in a fetal position, like he was either dead or asleep. Despite the scare, I could see his chest rising and falling. That's when I realized just how huge that hole was. It was big enough to fit a full-grown adult without having to crouch. The ground was tough, full of thick roots and tall grass. How long had it taken him to dig that with nothing but his hands? I took cover in the woods, hiding, and called for backup. I didn't want to wake the man and risk any kind of confrontation, so I stayed hidden until help arrived. When the team finally got there, getting the man out of the hole was anything but easy. He was in full survival mode, aggressive and disoriented, like a trapped animal. That was the moment it became crystal clear to me that something truly traumatic had happened to them. The family hadn't heard from them in over 2 weeks, and until the woman was found, they thought everything was fine. But their behavior, especially the look in that man's eyes, wasn't just fear. It was the look of someone permanently scarred by something that can't be explained. Both were taken to the hospital, and an investigation was launched. But I never got any answers. Every time I tried to learn more from my superiors, they just told me my job was done and there was nothing to report. Among the other rangers, theories started circulating. Some said they were on drugs, that they'd eaten some toxic plant, or that they were hallucinating from hunger. But none of us had the faintest idea what really happened. I later found out that the woman, despite her fragmented speech, kept insisting they were attacked by people from the forest. And that's when I remembered something I'd brushed off before. Maybe because of the blow to my head. The campsite was full of barefoot footprints. The man was wearing shoes when we found him. Same with the woman. Sure, they could have walked around barefoot at some point, but there were too many footprints, and they looked like they belonged to different people. Why wasn't any of this mentioned in the official reports? I don't have proof of what I'm telling you. All I have is my gut telling me something more happened in that forest, and no one wants to talk about it. One detail I've never been able to forget is that both of them had deep wounds on their bodies. Wounds that couldn't have been self-inflicted. Either they attacked each other, which seems unlikely, or they were attacked by someone else. But by who and why? Months later, I tried to contact them or their families, but was told they didn't want to talk about it anymore. I tried to move on. I swear I did, but 2 years later, in that exact same spot, 3 friends emerged from the woods in a state of absolute panic, claiming they had been chased by a group of people. The investigation was shallow, almost symbolic, and it was said that the whole thing was just something the kids made up for attention. But I saw one of them. I saw his face, and I know that no one fakes that kind of fear. No one acts out pure panic that well, especially not to get on the news. And this case, once again, didn't even make it to the news. The truth is, I don't have answers, only questions, and something tells me I'll die never knowing what really goes on in that forgotten part of the Appalachian Mountains. But I know this much. There are things in those woods that don't want to be found, and the people in charge would rather keep it that way.